Hello and welcome to the Bella Loves Patterns YouTube channel. I'm Bella, and this is the second time I am recording this intro because the first time my microphone wasn't connected. In this video I'm going to show you how to make the collar area of the Rosie shirt. The main thing with the Rosie shirt I've noticed is because the way I've done the collar on the Rosie shirt is the way you normally would make a collar in a coat, and a lot of people haven't made the collar the way the Rosie shirt is made. Usually, from what I've noticed, most sewing patterns, at least, they have the collars usually, sewn to the front facing, and then it's sewn to the shirt itself, and then it gets sewn all together, the front facing collar all around. The problem with that method, I find, is that if you're not very careful, the corners of the notch, so the notch area, gets really ruched, and that's not a very nice look. That's actually a terrible look. And the way you usually don't get that is when you sew the collar basically like an open shark's mouth. I don't know if that's a very understandable way of describing it, but you see during the tutorial how I actually make it. But one thing I should say before I end is that I am doing the front facing a little bit different from what I've done in the sewing instructions. In the sewing instructions, I have overlocked the inner side of the front facing. In this video tutorial, I have done it differently. I haven't overlocked. Instead, I have added 5 millimeters to the inner side when I was cutting, and I have sewn the interfacing to the front facing, trimmed, and then glued them together. So this way I get a very nice clean edge. I will show you during the tutorial how it looks. The other thing I will do different is the cuffs, because the cuffs in the sewing instructions, they are overlocked. This one I'm going to do it in a way that's encased, and then on the outside I'm going to stitch in the ditch, and this way you avoid using an overlocker. Hopefully you will like it. Let me know in the comments. Comment, if you're making, how many you have made, if you're planning to make, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. The first thing I have done was to sew the front facing right sides together with the back yoke, just where the front facing is at 1 centimeter. And then we also sew the front pattern piece right sides together with the other back yoke at 1 centimeter seam allowance, just joining the shoulders. Now what I'm going to do is going to the iron, and I'm going to press the seam allowances flat the same way that we have sewn, and then I will press the seam allowance towards the back yoke. I'm going to repeat the same thing on the inner back yoke. I would just say that be very gentle when you're handling the back yoke, especially this area that hasn't yet been sewn, the shoulder area, because it's on the bias. It's you need to be a bit more careful when handling it. Then now we can press the seam allowance of the front facing towards the back yoke. Now I have pinned the front facing right sides together with the front of the shirt along the center front. You notice that at the hem of the facing is shorter by 1 centimeter. This is okay, that's normal. So we're going to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew from the top to the bottom of the front facing at 1 centimeter on both sides. Now that we have sewn at 1 centimeter, I'm going to press the seam flat. Also, where we have the notch of the lapel, I'm going to clip into it, not cutting into the stitching line. On the facing side, I'm going to trim on the facing down to half. And I just stop at the notch, and I'm going to turn it with the shirt wrong side up, and I'm going to trim just on the area of the lapel on the shirt side. Now I'm going to press the seam allowances of the shirt on the bottom half towards the front facing. Up to the notch. Because my lapel area is a little bit rounder, I'm going to use a tailor's hammer to press this area. And I'm going to press the seam allowances of the lapel area towards the shirt. So you can turn to the right side and double check that I don't have any folds in weird places. We are going to be understitching the front facing, but we're going to understitch it on different places. I'm just going to find where my lapel notch is, and 1 centimeter below this notch, I'm going to sew on the side of the front facing, 1 centimeter above this notch. On the shirt side, I'm going to understitch on the shirt side up to this notch, and then I'm going to switch to the side of the front facing and understitch all the way down to the hem. I'm going to begin by sewing on the side of the facing at 1 millimeter from the seam of the facing. When I reach the marking on the front facing, I'm going to backstitch and end the seam here. I'm not going to cut my thread, but I'm just going to move to the side of the shirt and do the same thing, but now understitching on the shirt side at 1 millimeter from the seam. Now that I have sewn, I'm going to press on the right side just to smooth out any tension from my machine, and then we can press wrong sides together, because it's easier to press the side with the side that you have the understitching up. I'm going to turn it around because my understitching now is on the shirt side. Now that we have sewn the front facing to the front of the shirt and we have understitched everything, we are going to sew the upper area of our collar, so the notch area, and there is a notch on both the facing and the front of the shirt, so we need to match these two. So I'm going to turn them right sides together, and with the seam allowances going towards the front shirt, we're going to match the notch on the neck area, and we're going to sew only up to the notch, so from the center front of the shirt towards this notch, and then we're going to backstitch at 1 centimeter. Now that we have sewn the little piece of the front, we are going to cut towards the stitching line, and I'm just following my marking that I did earlier with the chalk. I also like to trim the back side. Sorry, let me cut the front as well. Trim on a diagonal. Down to half. I'm trimming maybe 5 millimeters, and then we can turn right side out. Just use the tip of my scissors. Just need to lay everything flat. Now that we have sewn the little front areas of our front facing, you can see here on the camera, I have the wrong side of the shirt facing up, and I have the right side of the inner yoke facing up. So what we're going to do, we need to sew the shoulder area of the inner yoke to the main shirt. And we don't sew the full thing, we just sew from the hem to up to where the front facing is. So I'm going to show you how we can do it. We just need to pin the inner yoke right side together with the wrong side of the front shirt. Just turn this way because I want to sew with the stitching line facing up. We're going to be using the stitching line as a guide. I'm going to sew the shoulder, but I need to leave the area where we have the front facing without sewing. So we need to sew from the armhole to this notch where the front facing is. I have the stitching of the yoke when we sew the yoke to the front of the shirt, and I'm going to back stitch where we have the notch. So here on this side is where we have the neckline. I'm going to back stitch, and following the stitching I'm going to stitch all the way down towards the hem. We have now sewn the shoulder, so you can see, so I sewed from the side of the facing towards the hem in one side, and on the other side I had to sew from the hem to the near the facing side. The reason why we can't have the inner yoke all the way sewn to the inside of the neckline, if you have done that, that was wrong, is because we need to attach later the collar, and we need this area of the neckline to be, we need to be able to open this area. Now with the right side of the yoke facing up, the one that's the inner side, we're going to trim the seam allowance of this layer only down to half. Maybe you're trimming something like 3 millimeters to 5, which would be half of the seam allowance. This way we can remove some of the bulk. With the facing side facing up, we are going to press the seam of the yoke through the right side. I'm not pressing too hard, I'm just lightly tapping it with steam. And let me just turn on the right side and see how it looks, because we don't want to create any weird folds. To sew the collar, we need to cut 2 of them, so I have them both interfaced. It's the same collar, and once we sew, we're going to decide which one is going to be the under collar, because there will be a little bit of a difference, even though the pattern itself doesn't have an upper and a under collar. So what we're going to do first is to sew the top edge of the collar at 1 centimeter. I'm going to pin it, and I'm going to take it to the machine. Okay, now that we have sewn the upper edge of the collar, I'm just going to press the seam flat. And I'm going to trim one side of the collar. The seam allowance is going to be trimmed to half. Once we've done that, I'm going to press the seam allowance towards what it will be now the under collar. So the collar that we have trimmed down is going to be the under collar, and we're going to press the seam allowances all towards the under collar. And my under collar is now this one. I'm going to get some chalk to mark it. I'm just going to use ham because the collar is not straight, and I will press the seam allowance towards the under collar. Now that we have pressed, I'm going to the sewing machine and I will understitch on the undercollar side at 1 millimeter from the seam. Now that we have understitched, I'm just going to lightly press. With the understitching side up, I'm going to press the collar wrong sides together. Now we have a press, I'm going to turn it right sides together. And with my upper collar facing up, I'm going to get all the seam allowances towards the wrong side, and I'm going to pin the sides of the collar. Okay, so we have both sides pinned. However, before we sew, I need to mark an intersection on this corner of 1 centimeter. I'm going to use a ruler for that, and I'm going to mark 1 centimeter from the side and 1 centimeter from this edge. And I'm going to do that on both sides. So this marking, this crossing that you see now here, we're going to sew at 1 centimeter from the edge, and we're going to stop right at this point. Now that I have sewn, let me show you how it looks. So we do need to stop where the intersection is, because this seam allowance is going to be sewn to this one is going to be sewn to the shirt. Press the seams flat. I'm also going to trim on a diagonal on both sides. You can press these seam allowances with a point presser towards the undercollar. I don't have my point presser here, so I'm going to push the seam allowance towards the undercollar, and I'm going to use the tip of the iron and I will repeat on the other side. Just take my scissors to help the seam allowance to find its place. I have the undercollar up. I'm trying not to get the seam going towards the front. The same type of intersections that we did on the sides, we're going to be doing here on this pointy area of the collar. I'm going to do on both collars. Just peel it open, and it will be at 1 centimeter, so this is like that little cross. Like so. Now you can see that I have this crossing on every corner of my collar, and we're going to do some markings on the shirt as well. Now that we have marked the intersections of the collar, I'm going to mark as well on the shirt. The place we're going to be marking, it has a bit of an angle, so it's just a few centimeters from the shoulder seam is where we're going to be marking the intersection on the shirt front and on the front facing. I'm going to turn it wrong side up, and then I will show you how I will be doing the marking, because these markings are going to match with the ones that we did on the collar. I'm going just to peel away my facing, and I need to mark here in this little corner the intersection at 1 centimeter. And also here. So you can see I have an intersection marked at this corner just below my shoulder seam at the neckline. I'll do the same on the other side. An intersection. And now I will do the same, but on the front facing. I have it now right side facing up. What we're going to do is to pin the undercollar. So this, what I'm pointing now, is the undercollar. We're going to pin the undercollar center notch to the center notch on the back yoke of the outer side. So pinning them right sides together. And we go all the way to the intersection of our collar. We're going to match it, the center of it, with the one on the shirt. I have pinned the under collar to what is the outside back yoke. So I pinned first the center together, so the center back of the back yoke with the center back of the under collar. Pinned all the way to the marking. There is a section of the collar I'm not pinning just yet. We're going to do this after because we just need to sew this one at the moment. So now with the upper collar, we're going to pin it to what is now the inner side of the back yoke. So right sides together. A way of reaching it is going through, is if you reach for the collar through the bottom edge of the back yoke. You can open it like that. You can see it's a lot easier. And then now I can match the center back of my upper collar with the center back of the inner back yoke. Now we have the full view of the collar pinned to the shirt. Remember that the upper collar matches with the inner side yoke and the under collar matches with the outside shirt. We are going to first sew only the bottom half seam of the collar to the shirt. So from this intersection on the collar to the other, we're going to sew at 1 centimeter. We are not going to be sewing into the seam allowance, so we need to start our sewing at the exact center of the intersection with back stitch. Now I'm going to sew the opposite side of the collar the same way. Now we have the collar sewn from one intersection to the other. Please note that some of the collar is still not sewn, so we just sew the bit that takes the back neck up to that intersection on the front. That's just a couple of centimeters below the seam of the yoke on the front. On the shirt side, we're going to go to that little intersection on the front where there is an angle. It's not quite a 90 degrees angle, but there is an angle on the front. We're going to clip the seam allowance of the front shirt in the direction of the stitching line. So let me just highlight here where I'm going to trim. So this clipping will be towards the stitching line. I did on the shirt side. This needs to be done as well on the front facing. And you can see the intersection here. And then we need to clip the front facing as well, same way we did with the shirt side. So we need to do both sides. This is going to allow us to open the seam, and then we'll be able to sew the rest of the collar. I have here with me the original Rosie shirt that we sewed in the sewing instructions, and the part of the sewing that we have done was, so far on the collar, it has been from this little corner here on the front to the other side. So we sew both sides, the upper collar and the under collar side. So it's sewed from one side to the other. The part now that we are going to be sewing is this area here. It's a smaller seam, and we are not going to be sewing into the seam allowances of the collar. May I remind you that on the shirt we're sewing, we have sewn a little bit of the notch area, and we have a clip here. So that little clip that is a raw edge needs to match with the fold of the collar this way. So we're going to pin that little bit of seam allowance on this area to the seam allowance of the collar, and we're going to do this now. Now we have fully attached the collar to the shirt. It's still like open like this. So this is one thing we need to do. We need to join the edges so we don't have them splitting apart. But this is how it essentially looks when you sew. And it's easier to sew because you don't get that ruching that you get when you sew them as a flat as a pancake. So now I have the facing right side up, and I'm going to press the seam through the right side. I'm not pressing it flat through the wrong side. Let me do on the other side. For now, I have just pressed the front of the collar. I'm going to press the rest of the collar once we have them joined together. Is the next step we need to do, is to join the seam allowances of these collars together. I'm not pressing the center back right now, but I will pin them together because I need to sew them, the seam allowances, only together. So there are notches on the center back that will be good to match. So the center back with the center back, and there's a side notch here. That's essentially where the shoulder line, the natural shoulder line is, not the pattern itself, but your natural shoulder, because the yoke itself, it does go beyond the shoulder. So, but what we're going to be sewing now is only the seam allowances from the side notch to this one. Okay, now I have the yokes at the back up to the side notches joined together at the seam allowance, and what I will do is to just give a few clips into the seam allowance, not all at the same time, but sporadically, like so. Now we can press the back neck. Now I'm going to push all the seam allowances towards the yoke. Okay, we're nearly done. We just have to secure the collars together on this front area here. So we're going to be turning wrong sides together, and we're going to grab all the seam allowances and we're going to sew them together. Going to the machine and we're going to sew within them. We're not going anywhere near here. We're just going to stay within the seam allowance. Now we have fully secured the collar, so we secured on this front area and we secured on the back side as well. This way the collar is not going to be coming up, opening on you. There are two sets of pleats on this back, one on the left, one on the right. I need to find the notches. And here's another one. We are going to sew them within the seam allowance. So I pleat them, so the pleats are towards the sides, and I will do the same on the other side, notch with notch. I'm going to sew within the seam allowance and I'll come back to the table. I have now sewn within the seam allowance the pleats, and I also have pressed very lightly the pleats as well. So now it's showing. It's kind of a bit difficult to see on the camera. Believe me, there are pleats here. So now we're going to deal with the back yoke, and then we come back to the back piece in a moment. Now we have the Rosie shirt right side facing up, so I'm just going to peel what is the outer yoke, so the back yoke, and then I have exposed here the inner yoke. What I'm going to do is to trim something like 3 millimeters to 3 millimeters of the inner yoke just on this bottom edge. Okay, now so I trimmed the bottom edge of the inner yoke, and make sure that you still have the center back notch, because this is going to come in handy. Now we need to pin the outer back yoke right sides together with the back piece. So first I'm going to pin these two together, and then we do the pinning of the inner yoke. Now we have pinned the back piece to the bottom edge of the outer back yoke, and I want you to notice that the inner yoke is still not pinned, so we're going to pin it in a moment. And what we need to do is, let me just pull my shirt towards me. We are going to roll everything. So let me just grab the ends of the shirt up, and I'm going to roll towards the edge that's pinned. So I'm just going to fold it like this, and you can see now my inner yoke. And what I will do, I'm just turning it around, turn them together. So we now need to pin the inner yoke to the rest of the back. We can pin everything together. So again, I'm going to match at the center back. Okay, now I have 3 layers pinned at the bottom of my back yoke, and I'm going to sew them all at 1 centimeter, so run from one side to the other. And I'll come back to show you how we're going to unwrap everything. Okay, now we have it sewn at the bottom of the yoke, and what we're going to do before we press the whole area flat is to trim the seam allowance of the inner yoke. How do I know which one is the inner yoke, you might ask? I'm also asking it myself. So I'm just turning it here, and I can see that this right side is matching with a wrong side. So I know that this piece here is essentially my inner yoke. So what I will do before I turn everything right side out is to trim the seam allowance down to half, and I'm doing it only on the inner yoke side. Now it's time to turn the shirt, so we just go through the opening on the side, and we grab the fabric that's inside and we just pull it out. What we've done is essentially what is commonly known as a burrito method, and it's a way of encasing a seam in a rolled manner. So here you can see that the inner side is enclosed, and also on the right side of the shirt is also enclosed. Okay, now we have pressed the bottom seam of the yoke, and what we're going to do now is to sew the side seams. For the side seams, I recommend that you do French seams. Why French seams and not, let's say, a straight stitch and then you just do an overlocker? Because this area under the arm is very tight. It's like a very small curved area. If we sew at 1 centimeter and overlock, this area doesn't actually fold and curve nicely. It will be a bit like something is holding it, like you need to clip it into the seam allowance, and it wouldn't really clip into the seam allowance. So the best way of doing it is to do a French seam. What I will do first is to have the sides wrong sides together. So we're going to sew at 5 millimeters at the sides, and because my seam allowance on the side is 1 centimeter, I'm going to sew first at 5 millimeters from the raw edge, And I'll come back, we're going to trim and finally sew the last seam for the French seam. So I'll see you in a moment. I'm just going to the machine. I'll do my 5mm stitching from the edge and I'll come back to show you. Okay, I've just sewn and I'm going to press the seam flat because this will help with any tension that builds into the fabric. And also I want to trim down by, I'm going to leave it with around 3mm. This creates a very delicate French seam. My camera's in the way and I can't reach. So I'm going to press through the wrong side just to anchor my seam allowance to, can be the front side or the back side, doesn't matter. But I need to anchor my French seam. Now we can go to the machine and we're going to sew at 5mm from the folded edge. Okay, now I have sewn the right sides together at 5mm and I can press. And also I'm going to try to press without, actually I can't press without. Now I'm going to press the seam allowance of the French seam towards the back. And I'm using a sleeve board, so I just get to press the side seam and nothing else. I have my work raised. And also here. And what you can see, because we have done a French seam instead of a 1cm seam, is that the underarm rose nicely without holding. I'm just going to press this area under the arm flat. Now we only have the cuffs to attach. I'm going to be doing them differently from what I've done in the instructions. The instructions is the easiest way of adding the cuffs. The way I'm going to do it here, because I don't want to use the overlocker, they're going to be done very different from what they have been done in the original instructions. So for now I'm just going to put my shirt aside. What we're going to be doing is take one, well, both of them really, and we're going to be sewing at 1cm from one of the edges, a straight stitch. So, or you can, instead of sewing, we can just fold it back 1cm and press. I'm going to do it with a stitch because it's easier. Now we have both cuffs and I have stitched at 1cm. We're going to use the stitching as a guide to fold one of the edges. So I'll just hold the okay, so now that we have both sides pressed, we are going to sew them right sides together here, and when sewing the edge that's folded, we are going to open it so we don't sew it folded like this. Now the cuffs are sewn at 1cm, or both of them, and I'm just going to, again, as always, press it flat. And I want to do one little thing, is to clip the seam allowance where the cuff folds. And what we're going to do, I'm going to press one seam allowance to one side and one to the other. This is easier to do on my sleeve board. My sleeve board is on the other side. And just repress this little bit here because it got unfolded. Okay, so I have one seam allowance on one side of the cuff going to one side and the other side going to the other. I'm going to fold it in half. Now I need my slip board. Okay, so here we have, I'm going to fold it in half. There will be 1 centimeter missing here. That's okay because this centimeter is folded on the other side. Okay, so you see how it is. If you cannot fold by eye and see that all around has 1 centimeter, use a ruler to measure. Now what we're going to do is to attach the cuff to the shirt, and the seam that we have that doesn't have the folded edge is the one that we're going to pin right sides together with the shirt. So I'm going to begin at the bottom seam. Okay, now we can go to the machine and I'm going to sew all around the cuff and the shirt at 1 centimeter, just remembering that the side that has the fold is not being sewn at the moment, it's going to be sewn later. So I have sewn the cuff to the shirt. I'm just going to press the seam flat. Now I'm going to press the seam allowance of the shirt towards the cuff. You see, I have the shirt now wrong side up, and what I will do is to have my folded edge of the cuff that's not sewn anywhere covering the stitching line of the cuff to the shirt, surpassing it maybe by a millimeter or two, and I'm going to pin it all around, and I will hand tack the cuff in place, because what I will do, I will sew the cuff in the ditch, and then when I'm sewing the ditch I need to catch a little bit of the cuff. If you cannot sew into the ditch, you can also sew at 1 millimeter from the seam, so all around, and that should be also a nice look. But this is a way of sewing the cuff where you don't need to use an overlocker. Now I have attached the cuffs to the shirt and have pressed them after. This is going to be the last thing. I'm not going to go and make the buttonholes on video. I'm going to make them later because I don't have the buttons that are going to go on it. But for now, what we're going to be doing is the hem of the shirt. So what we're going to do is to open the front facing, and we're going to trace a 1 centimeter line from the bottom edge of the front facing up. I'm going to fold the front facing right sides together with the front of the shirt, and the seam allowances that we have, they need to go towards the front facing as well. I'm going to pin, but I do need to check that my stitching line, so the line that we have just chalk mark, I need to check that they are actually at 2 centimeters from the edge. I'm going to sew following the chalk mark line on the front facing. So once I have sewn the bottom of the facing, I'm going to press it flat. I also want to trim diagonally the front, just to reduce a little bit of the bulk. Ideally you should do this over a point presser, but I don't have mine in hand. So this is how the center front looks like. And then now we're going to fold. We're going first to mark the hem, and then we're going to fold so we can stitch the hem. Now that I have sewn the front edge of my front facing, I'm going to mark the hem for the shirt, What I will do, because I need a fold of 2 centimeters deep initially, I'm going to mark a 4 centimeters guiding line, so I have this line to fold and press my hem all around. Press. So I have 4 centimeters, and I'm going to just very lightly mark all around the hem. This way I have a guiding line to fold my hem up. I'm going now to the iron, and I'm going to fold the raw edge to match with this 4 centimeters line all around the hem. Once I have it folded, I'm going to fold once again to encase the bottom raw edge, but this time the raw edge needs to match the fold of my hem, and then I will have all around folded allowance of 1 centimeter so I can stitch on the edge. Now that the whole hem is pressed at 1 centimeter, what we can do, especially not so much on this fabric, it's a viscose, so it's not as thick, but sometimes some fabrics where there are French seams, it becomes quite bulky when you fold it over itself. So what I like to do is go inside the first fold and trim a little bit of my French seam to reduce the bulk. Nothing that's going to be shown in here, but what is inside of the hem. So what I'll do is go a little bit in here and just trim some of this out from the French seam. And this helps to reduce the thickness when you top stitching the hem. And I'll repeat the same thing on the other side. So I want you to notice, sorry, let me do it on this side. I wanted to notice that I'm not trimming where is visible, but what is inside of the hem. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch at the beginning, and we're going to sew all the way to the other side. Now we have sewn the hem, so here's how it looks from the wrong side and all around. Now we have finished sewing the shirt. I'm not going to show you how to do the buttonholes, but the buttonhole markings are on a pattern and they are sewn vertically on the Rosie shirt.